In this video I'll be showing you how to rebuild a Marzocchi Shiver fork. Um, Here I have one fork obviously. I will not be showing you how to do the other one. This is just a single fork, although the process is identical to the other one. Obviously with the exclusion of there's no brake mount on this fork. So first thing you're going to want to do is don't pull the fork tube off the bike. You're going to want this mounted in your clamp, in your crown. And the reason behind that is you need to remove this top cap here. And without that clamp on there, it's very challenging to move. This will want to spin on you, and you really have no grip or leverage to get this top cap off. So before removing the top cap, there is this cap on top. This is your rebound for your dampening. It's just essentially a little cover that goes over and gives you an indicator on your positive and negative rebound. This is a 1.5 millimeter set screw. You're going to go ahead and remove that, and this cover comes off. From here we can see the top of the cartridge and the rebound adjuster. Next we're going to want to let all of the, or adjust the rebound such that it's all the way out, so counterclockwise. You'll see it's maybe about, I don't know, a quarter inch or so until that screw stops. So now what you're going to want to do is remove your top cap. I do not have the proper end wrench for this. It's a large metric end wrench. I'd say it's probably a, don't quote me on this, maybe a 26 millimeter or so. I used a crescent wrench. That's not the best tool in my opinion, because you can round off these edges and damage this top cap. Last thing you want to do is round out, your edges here and strip that out, or damage your anodizing. So I don't recommend this. I'll be using it for this demonstration just because I already have this broke loose. But essentially all you're going to want to do is remove your top cap. You can see once you get it pretty loose, it's pretty easy to do by hand. Now, one thing I want to mention before going too deep into this, this will potentially make a mess. I'm doing this inside my office, so it's not a great location for it, although I know what I'm in for. It's better to do this in a garage or something like that where you're not afraid to spill your fork oil. Although one thing that is important when rebuilding forks is the clean work environment. So that's why I'm doing it in my office. So now that this top cap's out, we do have this E-clip. This is holding the top cap to the damper. So a small screwdriver can get right in there and pop this E-clip or C-clip, whatever you want to call it, off. That's what it looks like. There's also a small shim. It's a very thin washer that is under that E-clip. You'll need to pull that off as well. So from there, you can simply pop this top cap off. Now you'll see on the top of this cartridge there's a rubber O-ring here. That's what's sealing off, the shaft from coming through that top cap to the outside world. So it is possible you can have some leakage through there. On this fork I did not, so I won't be worrying about that O-ring. Although that is a potential replacement part. Now, I don't know if any of this is available. This is a 2002 Marzocchi Shiver fork. I haven't been able to find any parts for this other than the seals that'll talk these lower seals and dust cap. I haven't been able to find any except for these, although these are probably pretty common O-rings on a lot of Marzocchi forks, so you can probably find them that way. Another thing I'll recommend is there's a couple O-rings throughout this fork. You can also simply use a digital caliper or something similar. This one's not digital, obviously. but you can measure that out and find an O-ring replacement. So before going any further, I'm going to go ahead and dump out the fork oil. I've got a bottle here, whatever works. Just go ahead and dump this out the best you can, because it will get everywhere. And right off the bat, I noticed this with my other fork. This is very dirty oil. I'm not sure when the last time these were rebuilt. I know that they were rebuilt based off the dust shields. They are Enduro shields that are on this fork, so I know that they're not factory Marzocchi shields and seals. But judging by the color of the oil, I would not be surprised if these forks are, 10 years old since their last rebuild. Okay, so that's most of the fork oil. Something I'll point out, I'm not sure if the camera can point it or pick it up, but you can see that sediment. That's more than likely just a bunch of dirt that has accumulated in the last, the other fork that I did, the left side, the brake side. That's pretty gross. This fork was leaking, and after seeing that, I can't imagine why. That stuff's like sandpaper on seals. Okay, so now that we have the top cap off, we can slide down the outer fork tube and we can start seeing more of the fork itself. So here we have the spring, and then this is the upper portion of the shock cartridge, or the fork cartridge. So what we're going to do now is we need to remove this nut off the cartridge. So again, I don't know what size this is. I'm using a crescent wrench. The last one I did wasn't on very tight, so it's pretty easy to get off. As well as this. I believe this is like a 6mm wrench that goes on here. I didn't have one. It only went down to 7. My set did. So I'm just using some pliers. Again, this is not a very good way to do it. If you're not careful, you can easily damage this top part. But it's not too crucial, and as long as you're careful, you will not damage it. So go ahead and, this is tough with 2 hands, but oh, something else to note before I get started. This is reverse thread. That threw me off for a little bit. You're going to actually want to twist the nut clockwise in order to get it off. It's actually righty loosey, lefty tighty. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but yeah, so you'll see just like that. So hang on to your fork tube because things are going to start wanting to slide out here. At this point, you have your top nut, you have this white washer. Something to notice is there is a recessed portion in the center here that is only on one side. So this is directional, goes on just like that, recessed portion facing up, your top nut, just like that. So keep in mind, that's the orientation. Next we have this plastic spacer. This is just a spacer between your top nut and your spring. So I imagine, I've never shortened forks myself, but if, let's say you want to get a little less fork travel, something you can do is change the spacer out, either cut it or replace it completely with a shorter one. That way your cartridge is shorter. Not only the cartridge is shorter, but your overall spring tension is less. You'll have less, well, no preload on the spring, but your effective length will shorten by changing this out. So there's that. Once you have that off, you can pull the spring right out. And at this point, I'm going to set some stuff down and grab a rag. You can see my hands are already very oily. And I do not want to make a mess. Okay, so springs wiped down. Move all the tools out of the way. And go back to the fork tube. So once the spring's out, not a bad idea to grab your bottle or whatever you're dumping your old fluid into and just try and dump out some more. The spring kind of likes to hang up fluid. You can see how much more I got out just by removing the spring. Another thing to note, your cartridge will be filled with some oil. So as you go through this process, it's kind of never-ending oil because that cartridge will always be leaking some. Although you obviously don't need to get it all out, it's just fork oil, but you want to get as much out as you can so when your fresh oil goes in, it's nice and clean. Okay, so at this point we have everything on the top, inside off, but what we need to do is get everything out of the stanchion tube. So you'll see I was able to just simply slide this all the way out. There's nothing, this top nut is really what holds everything from preventing that. So as soon as that's off, everything will slide out. So the next thing we want to do, and this isn't necessarily required for changing out your seal, although I'm going to show you how to do it anyways, because if your fork's old, which I'm sure a lot of your guys's are, I mean this is a 2002 model, it's seen a lot of riding time. There's a lot of dirt that accumulates in here, and where all that dirt accumulates is the bottom of this tube down here, and I don't think the camera will pick it up when the time comes, but on the last tube I did, I could literally see, I couldn't see the bottom. You could see this kind of anodizing color on the inside of the tube. The bottom looked black, and that was all just dirt and sediment, or whatever has accumulated in this tube over time settles at the bottom. So I like to pull the cartridge out and just clean everything you can. That way we know we have a really good rebuild on this fork. So in order to remove the cartridge, what you're going to need is a 15mm socket and ratchet. This is a 3/8 drive. I wouldn't go any smaller. I don't even know if you can get a 15mm and a 1/4 inch drive. But it takes a fair amount of leverage. So what I do is set it down, kind of hold the bottom, and you should be able to break it loose just like that. So keep going. You don't really know when you're done other than pulling up. So you can see there, my cartridge is extended all the way out, but that's all it goes. So we still got a little bit more to go. It is a good idea to kind of hold on to it to help prevent it from spinning. It doesn't necessarily prevent your cartridge down here from spinning, because this shaft and the cartridge body are independent of each other. But if you hold it like this, you can kind of feel it start to pull out as you loosen this. Okay, yeah, I just felt it there. So at this point, your cartridge slides out. So there is an O-ring, and I'm already dripping oil everywhere, so I will try to stop that. First thing I'll point out is your holes here at the bottom. So this is a rebound cartridge, obviously, so as the fork compresses, it will go something like, oh, and there's a bunch of oil. It will go like that, and there we're fully compressed. And as the fork spring pushes back out, your cartridge will rebound, draw oil in at some rate that is, you know, defined by your rebound adjustment here for your dampening at some rate, and that will increase or decrease your rebound dampening. So once all the fluid's out, you know, and your adjustments all the way screwed in with no rebound, you can slide this pretty easily, and I'd expect that even without, you know, any fluid in there. So you can give it a couple, you know, pumps, kind of get all that gross fluid out. Always have a rag handy because, again, this is kind of a messy process. But just get as much as that dirty fork oil off as you can. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set this down. Also wipe my bottom fork, the stanchion, off. I'm going to go ahead and look down there for now. I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see. Probably not. I'll see if this light helps any. But I can see down there it looks very muddy and gross at the bottom of that. So we'll worry about that in a little bit. What I'll show you now is the most important part of a fork rebuild, and that is changing out your actual seals and, well, your seal in this fork tube, as well as the dust cover or guide cover. I don't care what you want to call it. Really, all it does is it prevents, you know, big debris, mud, sand, that sort of thing from making it past into your actual rubber seal. Sort of the first line of defense. So we'll grab our tube. Now, before I kind of get into this, I want to make note that this is pretty important, how these are removed. I technically don't have the correct tools, and I won't be showing you the correct, probably what any bike shop would do. Although I don't have the proper seal removal tools on hand. So I'll be showing you how I remove these without damaging the tube. You need to be extremely careful doing this because it is very easy to scratch any of these inner surfaces, and your seal may not make a seal like it should if you do that. So the first thing I do, obviously we need to get this blue dust cover off. You can grab a flathead screwdriver, and it's a little challenging to show, but really all you're going to do is get in and under like this and start prying out or prying up. So pull up a little bit, you know, move 180 degrees to the opposite side, pull up 180 degrees or so, and you can already see, you know, I've already kind of broken it loose. And just like that. That was pretty aggressive. Wasn't expecting that. But you can see I didn't scratch any of that inner surface. It's not necessarily crucial on this outer seal to not scratch the surface, because this will not be retaining any oil. There shouldn't be any oil making it past or into this seal. But you still don't want to scuff up on the inside. It's just not good. However, the next seal is what you really want to be careful with. So I'm probably going to sit down for this one. That way I don't damage it. Take my time and show you the best that I can. Before I start taking it off, we'll see there's a clip in here. So this is, again, it's almost a C-clip, but it's compressed something similar to my fingers and then out, and it's going into a groove on the inside of this fork tube. So again, we don't want to damage any of the surface in there, so we want to be careful. The best thing that works for this is probably a little pick, like a 90-degree angle pick. Maybe with some electrical tape or something wrapped around it so you don't, you know, poke in and scuff the sides. But for this purpose, I'll just be using a little flathead screwdriver. It works And as long as you're careful, you won't damage anything. So you'll see there's 1, 2, 3 little indents that allow you to get back behind it. So I'll start with the one that is closest to the ends. There's these 2 that are close to the end. And you're just going to want to kind of pry behind there, and you'll see it starts to pop up and out. Just like that. Careful, that almost shot out and hit me in the eye. That would not feel good. So yeah, that's out. Now the only thing holding the actual seal in is compression. It's just pressed in there essentially. And this will sort of, hold it from really coming out. Now, this is where you want to be extra careful. How I do this, I will place a paper towel or a rag on this surface, and I will go down and I will pry up. Reason being, I don't want to damage this. That's really just a visible surface, but you don't want to, have this all chowdered up and looking bad. The other thing to note is you don't want to get the screwdriver too far this way, because as you pry out, your screwdriver can scratch the whole, way up here. And that's exactly where your fork seal presses down into. You'll have a scratch there, and it's possible you'll leak fluid, through that groove out the perimeter, I guess, of the seal. So be extra careful there. So I'll get into it. I have a rag here. I'll be using that as my little protector. And I know I'm pretty up close, but my camera won't go any higher. So, let's see if I can adjust my light. So similar to what you did with the outer dust shield, give it a little bit, rotate the fork tube, try the other side. Rotate a little bit. Try the other side. I'm actually going to sit down, kind of do this in my lap where I have a little bit more light. But I will be right back and I'll show you guys once it's all the way out. Okay, so it's out. That one was a lot harder to remove than I remember on the last fork. That might be why the other one was leaking. I don't know. Maybe it was leaking around the outside. Hard to say, but it's out. Something I found, I know I recommended going back and forth, 180, 90, kind of do a star pattern when you're trying to pull this out. I actually found if you reef on it on one side, once it gets past a certain point, it will just pop right out. So I'd probably recommend doing it that way. When you go back and forth, it comes up a little bit, then you do the other side and it kind of pivots it back down and you kind of fight it. So I'd recommend just going one side and give it hell. You can see kind of the inside of the fork tube here. I'll wipe it down. See, there's all kinds of crud in there. Old fork oil and dirt, grease maybe. Okay, so right there you can see the inside. There's a little bit of damage right there. I don't think that was from me. These forks had been rebuilt in the past, but the damage it appears is, and it's not much damage, I'm probably exaggerating it, but it looks like it is above the seal. It's into your outer dust cover here. So nothing to worry about there. Everything else looks really good. So yeah, I'd call that a success. Now, right under the seal there's a washer. Kind of stick your fingers in and pull it out. It's about an 1/8 inch thick, and you want to pull that out. This is the washer that your seal rests on. And under that is this little split spacer. You can see there's a split right there. It's a compression fit spacer that will go in and sort of hold its own in there. And when you pull that out, excuse me, you can pull out your actual fork guide. So this is the feels plastic. I don't know what kind of plastic it is. If it's it's obviously probably not a self-lubricating plastic because it's covered in fork oil and it doesn't need it. But it's a very slippery plastic tube, and this is your lower guide. So if we can imagine the fork here and your stanchion coming up, fork tube's here. This provides all the necessary reinforcement for the fork tube to, want to wobble back and forth in there. If you have a lot of play with your lower fork tube, your stanchion, it's more than likely a worn out guide. This fork has a lot of hours on it from what I can tell, and this is still in really good shape. So I'm not worrying about this. I also don't know if you can get these. I haven't really looked around for Marzocchi Shiver fork parts. And I really don't know a lot about this fork in general or any fork from Marzocchi, but it's possible that other fork parts from Marzocchi will work on this, and you may be able to find one of these if it's worn out. The important thing is it's a 35 millimeter diameter, obviously by whatever your outside diameter is. I'll go ahead and measure that for you. Notice this is in inches, not millimeters, but it looks like it's 1.468 by more than 6 inches, because that's all my calipers go to. I guess I have a tape here. Looks like pretty much 7.5 exactly, which is kind of interesting because I believe this fork has exactly 7.5 inches of travel, so that's good to know. So yeah, I take this out, kind of wipe it down. We'll wipe down the inside a little bit later, so I won't get too into that right now. So I'll wipe down the fork again, slide this back in. Again, I just pulled this out for demonstration purposes to show you if you did have to replace it. But really, you're just going to want to slide it back down in, wipe off our little split spacer, slide that back in, if I can get it. It's a little tough because you need to press it in due to the split. And then the washer. So something I noticed, this looks like a die cut washer. So essentially when they make these, they just, press this out of a sheet with a really sharp die. And one artifact you'll get out of that is it kind of has a rolled edge and also has a very flat edge. So I didn't notice when I took this out which way it went, although I can tell there's sort of some surface scratching. You can see a diameter, about half the diameter of the outer, or not half, but it goes, there's a ridge right there. And it looks like that is the ridge that was sort of making contact with this inner split spacer. So that tells me it goes, down like this. Another thing, or another reason why I put this down, this is your flattest surface, and that's what your seal is going to be going up against. I don't know if it matters, but just kind of thinking about it from a mechanical aspect, you'll want your seal on that flat part. So we'll put that in just like that, and now it's on to driving in the new replacement seal. So as I mentioned, the seals I'm going with are Enduro bearings and fork seals. I don't know if there's any other options. When I researched this, Enduro seemed like the only option that I saw, but I didn't search very hard. So I think I paid about 30 bucks for these. Came with 2 seals and 2 of the dust covers. So you can see here's the old one, here's the new one. They look pretty similar. Actually, the inside is a little bit different on the ones I have here, so that's interesting. There's almost another seal right here, whereas this one does not have that. So that's really interesting. Otherwise, they're the same outer diameter. And actually, my newer one has a little bit more material here when it presses in. So I suspect this will want to stay in a lot better than the older existing ones that were on it. So that's interesting. This is obviously the old one, the old dust seal, the old seal itself. So I'm going to set those aside and place the new ones down here. Now, for driving the new seal in, one of the most important things is the seal is directional. So you can see here we have a flat face with a little bit of a ridge coming out, and if we turn it over, you can see there's a recessed portion down in there. Now, down in there, there's actually a coil spring that wraps around the circumference of the seal, and it's applying constant tension in on the seal. And that's what gives you your seal characteristics. Otherwise, if it was just rubber, you know, the rubber would wear away and you'd leak oil. This always has tension around to make the best seal possible. So when you think about this, that spring needs to go on the inside. The best way I think about this is when there's pressure inside, there's not necessarily that much pressure inside of that will act on this, because it's simply a rebound type damper. But if you think of pressure being on the spring, you want that pressure to go down into that ridge and squeeze the O-ring tighter so that it creates a better seal. If you have it flipped to the other way, that pressure is going to want to push the spring out and leak all your fluid out. So this is a very common seal used on everything. Your seals on your car engine, on your crankshaft, your front and rear main seal, more than likely use this style. I don't know if I've ever seen a seal that doesn't look like this on that application. So the most important thing to know is keep that spring on the inside. Lastly, an important note when doing this, you need a method to drive this in. Now, I don't have the proper tools here. Typically what I'll use is sockets. They're round, they come in any diameter. So you just need to find one that will fit. So this is a 35 millimeter inside diameter. This is a 34 millimeter socket, and it seems to fit well enough to where the outer diameter of the socket is not larger than the seal. It's just small enough so when you drive this down, you know, your socket's not going to hit on your tube that you're driving it into. So when sizing one of these out, it's important to get one big enough to where you can kind of get the most contact area. You also want to drive on the outside of the seal as much as you can, because this is really the reinforced. These seals are actually metal reinforced on the outside, so you want to press that seal in by pushing on that outer circumference. So in this application, a 34 millimeter works pretty dang good. I didn't try a 35, but I'd be hesitant of a 35. It probably won't work for you. They also make proper tools for this. There's plenty of bike applications or bike companies making this tool. You can also just get your generic seal pusher and puller kit from any, you know, auto parts store or supplier. So we'll grab the fork tube. This may be a little challenging to see, and actually before starting, another important thing we want to do is lubricate this seal. Now typically you want to use a grease. Whenever I do seals, I like to use the lubricant or the oil that's being used in the final application. So I'm just going to use fork oil. This is Modal fork oil 7.5. This is a Modal is a motorcycle brand, although fork oil is fork oil. 7.5 weight, the weights transfer between applications, so whatever you can get your hands on is going to be the best for you. So what I'll do, I'll just put a little bit on my finger and apply it around this seal. So this just helps the seal go in. If it gets hung up a little bit, you know, it's not going to tear the rubber. And overall, it just makes it easier to put into the fork. So remember, the spring side goes in, the flat plane goes out. You're simply going to get it started, just like that. Take your socket, and for this demonstration, I'll just put it down like that. Put the fork tube on top, and give it a good push. Now my table is not very heavy duty. It's not made for this. So I'm going to go ahead and do it on the ground here real quick. Okay, and just like that, it's all the way down to the bottom. One thing you'll notice, you're at the bottom when you can't shake the fork and hear that washer going up and down, because the washer has nowhere to go. It's all that split spacer and the washer are all sandwiched down into there. So the new seal is installed. Now all we have to do, take our clip, and we're going to want to clip that back in place so that the seal can't go anywhere. Just like that. Snap it down into place. Make sure it's clipped in. You can see right there I'm not. Just like that. We're clipped in. Now if that seal ever tries to work its way out, it can't. Okay. Now we want to put our dust cover on. So I don't put oil on this one. I don't know if it matters, to be honest. My theory on not doing it is you want a nice pressure fit, because the only thing holding this in is friction. So if you put oil on there, it's likely that it will want to slide off easier. So I just give it kind of a good wipe down, make sure I don't have any oil on this surface. Another thing I guess you could do if these pop off on you a lot is do some silicone or something. You got to be careful not to get it into your actual O-ring. But I suppose you could use some sort of glue, if you will, to glue those in, although I haven't found the need to. Now these press in pretty easily. You can see just with your hand, you know, you can press that right in, and you're done. Okay. So before beginning the reassembly process, I want to clean out this tube here. Like I said, a lot of stuff gets built up down in there. If you refill it with fork oil, you're just going to mix all that stuff around, and you're going to have dirty fork oil again. Much dirtier, well, yeah, much dirtier than if you do clean this out. So this nut will come out. From what I found, oh, well, that popped out pretty easily. There is an O-ring here, so it's kind of pressed in and it's hard to get your fingers in to pull it out. If you can't get it out, take your cartridge and just stick it in there, and you can use your cartridge kind of as a tool and push this nut out. And go ahead and wipe this off. Reason being, you want to inspect this bottom O-ring. So this is the nut that holds your cartridge to the bottom of your fork tube so that it doesn't come flying out and rebound and you lose your front wheel. That's the last thing you want to happen. So go ahead and clean it, inspect it. This O-ring appears to be in good shape. It was not leaking, so I'm going to go ahead and reuse it. You can also change this out pretty much at any time. You will lose your fork oil unless you tip the fork upside down. But if for any reason you get done with your rebuild and you're leaking out the bottom, pretty easy to fix. You don't need to do this whole tear down like I've already done. So yeah, I'm going to reuse it. And then from there, you can take a look into your tube. And you probably won't be able to see just due to the angle I'm at. Actually, let me grab my cell phone light and see if I can show you. So, I don't know if you can see, but there is a bunch of crud down there that I want to get out. So I'm going to try and do that. Now, this is kind of a challenging part to do because you have a tiny, tiny little hole over here. You can't get anything into there to clean. You got a big one here, but you know, you're 2 feet until you hit bottom. So what I found is take a long metal rod. This is a welding rod, and stick something like a paper towel and wrap some tape around it. Make yourself like a giant Q-tip and stick it down in there and clean the best you can. Pull it out and replace this, and stick it down there, clean it out. Get it as best as you can cleaned. You don't want to see anything down there. Another way I've done this is using brake cleaner. I would usually advise against it when we're talking about fork parts, but when you're disassembled and you know what you're working with, it's typically safe to use. You don't want to use brake cleaner on any rubbers or plastics. But at this point, the fork is at its component level. You know, there's no rubber assemblies or anything else going on. So it's typically safe to do. So you could squirt some brake cleaner down into here, you know, kind of plug the ends, swirl it around, and then blow it out with compressed air until you're completely clean in there. So I won't show you the cleaning part because it's going to take me a little bit, but clean it well. Okay, so we're all clean now. Again, I don't think you can see down in there, but the amount of stuff I cleaned out of the bottom of this was crazy. I ended up blowing kind of high pressure water, or squirting high pressure water down in there to break all that free. I didn't use any harsh chemicals because I'm inside, but I have a handheld shower in my bathroom, and I just washed all that crap down the drain, and then made sure it was extremely dry because you don't want water in here. So you can use water to clean it, but make sure it's all out because water and oil don't mix, and it will lighten up your fork oil. Probably cavitate, do things you don't want to in a fork. So get all the water out. Another thing to note, the bottom here where this nut goes with the O-ring may be very dirty on the inside of there where this O-ring seals. So take your pinky, kind of clean out in there. If your pinky's too big, like mine kind of is, stick something else. You can see all that black crap. That was just from the inside of that mating surface for that O-ring. So make sure you get that really clean because that is a vital seal. If that seal's bad, you will lose all of your fork oil all over the ground. Hopefully you don't store your bike inside or anything, and that happens because you're going to have fork oil in your house. So clean it really well. Again, all the water off of it. And we can begin assembly here shortly. One other thing we're going to want to do is wipe out the inside of your upper tube. It's possible, you know, dirt and stuff, even though all the oil's out and there's no way for anything really to get trapped, there can be dirt and stuff stuck on the sides. So usually I'll just kind of wad up a paper towel, take something, I'm using this welding rod again, push it all the way down to one side, push it all the way back to the other. Now I should have done this when the seals weren't in. Well, it's not too crucial. I did clean where the seals were placed, but if you do that, you can get it very clean on the inside. It's probably better to use like a microfiber, like a small microfiber cloth or something. Paper towels can leave little fuzzies behind, although in this case I've looked, it hasn't left anything behind, so I'm not too worried about it. This paper towel is kind of soaked in fork oil anyway, so it's not really leaving anything behind. Okay, so let's begin the reassembly process. So we're going to want to put this cartridge back into the bottom stanchion first. So if you remember how that goes, it goes this way. I see a bunch of crud already. This was the bottom. See all that dirt crap. I'm going to go ahead and wipe as much as that I can off. Another thing I suppose you could do, I didn't worry about this. I'm probably going to change my fork oil after this season. I don't ride very much, so once a season's fine for me, but if you do it more often, it doesn't hurt. But there's probably a bunch of crud in this cartridge too. So you could, you know, get your cartridge down, suck up some oil, squirt it out, dispose of it, filter it out, do whatever you want to do. And keep doing that until you cycle it and get all this crap out of the cartridge. Again, I'm not going to worry about it because I'm probably going to change my oil after, I don't know, maybe 5 rides anyways. So I guess I'll just kind of do that naturally throughout my fluid change process. Another thing is there is an O-ring right here. I'm not entirely sure what this O-ring's job is because it can kind of slide and do whatever it wants and it will never be in the same spot. So I don't know what this O-ring is for. If you guys know, you should comment. I also don't know how you could change that. Yeah, I'm not sure how this whole top cartridge comes apart or if it even does. So don't worry about this one. You might not even have it there, who knows. Yeah, the only other O-ring I believe I mentioned earlier is this one. This one is important as well, so if that's leaking, you should get that one taken care of. Okay, so we're going to slide the cartridge back down into the stanchion. You can see we're protruding out right there. So take your nut, thread it on. Doesn't hurt to put some fork oil or some O-ring grease or something on that seal. My fingers are oily as is, and I wiped it off with the oily rag, so it is already pretty well lubricated. But we're then going to want to tighten this up. So there I'm spinning the cartridge to kind of get that nut on. Also, of course, use the ratchet. It's kind of challenging because the cartridge wants to spin as you're doing this. But as soon as it starts to get tight, it kind of pulls everything together and doesn't allow the cartridge to spin on you. So like right there, I now have tension. There's a torque rating on this. I do have torque wrenches, although I'm not using it in this application. You should. I encourage you to. Although I feel I have a pretty good sense of how tight things have to be, so I typically don't worry about it. You can also torque these when you're done in the process too. But do follow the torque rating spec. I have added a link to the PDF file from Marzocchi on the service of this fork in the description, so check that out, and I do believe that they have all the torque specs in that document. Okay, so the cartridge is back into the stanchion. From here, we can slide our tube back over. So it's pretty important to add grease or oil on your seals here. This is when you're actually sliding everything together into that O-ring. So add some, be pretty liberal with this, add a good amount of oil all along the inside of that seal there. Again, just so if it hangs up, it doesn't have the tendency to tear through that seal, it will kind of slide and glide right over it. Don't want to damage your brand new seal and start this process all over again. Not only is it 30 to 40 bucks in parts, it's a couple hours in labor, so don't do that. You will notice we have a taper here, so that's the seal will fit onto that taper a little bit better and find its way on. However, you do want to be perfectly parallel and coming right at it in order to not damage or to reduce any sort of damage on these seals. So kind of find it, and it will just slide right on like that. Now you will have a fair amount of resistance. Something interesting, you can see I already have a bunch of dirty oil right there. So um, literally I just pushed, and you know the seal is making good seal because it's pushing everything out. That's all just that assembly oil and everything I used with my finger. So it won't leak in the end when you're done with it, but you may see that early on for a little bit until things kind of clean up. There is a bit of resistance. Again, these seals are brand new, so you're making really good, you have a really good seal in there. Don't worry about that. They'll kind of loosen up, find their happy place, and make a good long-term seal. So if we push the fork tube all the way down now, we can pull up our cartridge. Yes, we can. Okay, so we will simply pop this back on. Again, not a bad idea to put some oil on there. I can already see some oil on there, so it's not bad. There's a star pattern on this, so it does meet that. If you can't push it down, rotate it, you can see it kind of finds its happy place right there and will clip in, and you know that it seated past the O-ring. So now all you're going to do is pull your shock tube up and start threading this on. Before you get too crazy, it's probably not a bad idea to put your E-clip back on, that way you don't lose your cartridge down into there, because then you have to take the top cap back off. So let's go ahead and put this clip back on. Take your flathead, snap it into place, make sure it's on there, and it is. Then tighten your top cap. Now again, there is another torque rating for this. I'm just going to get it hand tight, and then I will tighten it fully. I recommend you tighten it fully too, once these tubes are slid back into your crowns. Last step, take your, this is just your little plus minus, indicator and neat little cover. Stick it back on. Tighten your 1.5 millimeter set screw. And your fork tube, or your fork, is done. Freshly rebuilt. Should last you a good amount of riding. Not a bad idea to push down. Make sure you have rebound. Make sure it feels, really good, which it does. I can feel the dampening. Like I mentioned earlier, you might see little oil marks. That's pretty common. You can see one right there. These seals kind of need to find their happy place and really get soaked in oil and start to soften up. So don't worry about it too much. If it leaks too much, and it never stops leaking, it's likely that something is damaged. You might have a scratch down here where fluid's making it by. You may have not got the seal in properly. You may have scratched your tube on the inside. Fluid's making it past. There's a lot of ways for fluid to leak out. So hopefully this helps, and hopefully you don't have any damage to your forks. Hopefully they're in really good shape like these are, and you're able to get more life out of them.